I think Chris is in the call now. Can you hear me, Chris?
Hello.
Excellent. Sorry, having a little bit of trouble figuring out which URL lets other people join rather than view. I think we're up to 4 people, so I'll give it another couple of minutes and then we can begin. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Good morning, maybe.
Morning.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
That is most agreeable. All right.
I think this is probably everyone then. Would people like to begin?
Sounds good.
Okay. So it would probably be useful to start by just going quickly round who's attending and which company they're from, and then start the agenda.
Yep, sounds good to me.
Okay, so I'll begin. I'm Howard Hellier. I'm working for IBM.
I'm Josh Clulo. I'm working at Giant.
Dave Pacheco, I'm also a joint.
And Chris Bailey, I work at IBM with Howard.
I'm Bradley Meck. I work at NodeSource.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda was just to check everyone was happy with the governance, so the contributor guidelines and the governance guidelines that were posted as drafts. I think they're copies of the standard Node.js ones.
To the extent that they're copies of the standard ones, that seems fine.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's just boilerplate stuff, really, and I guess it's if anyone's got any concerns, then raise them. Otherwise, we'll just assume they're good.
Okay. So, should we move on to the discussion about the scope that we want to tackle and the various issues of what the group's for, effectively?
Yeah,
Seems
sounds
reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess the first thing to get out of the way is to define roughly what end goals we're after, what we really want to achieve. So I added various bullet points, sort of suggested ideas to the agenda. Did anyone have any thoughts on those initially?
I think those make sense, but I'm wondering if it makes sense to think about a sort of broader end goal that is like, what are we trying to achieve for the community or for anyone else or whatever by having the working group at all? Like for example, why even define use cases for post-mortem analysis? Not saying that we shouldn't, just is that there's some underlying principle there, which is something like to elevate the role of post-mortem debugging for the Node users and make that a first-class thing for people. And that's kind of how I obviously see it. But is that kind of what we're doing, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I've that list of items sort of gets down to the nitty-gritty without really defining sort of what the top level thing we're trying to achieve is. So yeah, I think it's fair enough to try and define that. That's probably a good idea. So, what was it can you repeat what you said?
I'll repeat what I think I said when I remember I said. Something about, I'm not even happy with it as I said it, but elevating the role of post-mortem debugging for all Node users and making those techniques and tools available to Node users. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I think an open question in my mind is to what extent this working group is going to be developing new technologies as opposed to identifying, cataloging, and supporting new technologies developed by other people, and to what extent we're making recommendations to Node itself. Something I'd love to see is, like, for example, a first-class section in the Node documentation about debugging in general and post-mortem debugging. And there are a lot of different things out there already. We could document existing things and say, look, these are a couple different tools that provide these different things. But having that be something that is more visible to Node users is something that I'd be interested in, as an example of sort of this identifying, cataloging, and promoting this stuff. And are people interested in working on this stuff as part of the working group?
On the documentation, or what are you talking about?
Sorry, I meant on the actual tools. Is the working group about developing new tools, or is it about sort of promoting and gathering the existing stuff out there?
I think developing tools might be one thing where we find gaps, but if you develop them, you've then got to publicize them and let people know what's there. So we should also publicize and let people know what's there already, perhaps, so people know what gaps we're filling in. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it definitely does.
So trying to complete the story of how you debug a Node application sort of after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what it would be great to do is document some failure use cases, right? So starting from we've got a crash caused by V8 to a failure in a native extension to something going wrong inside a pure JavaScript module, and then talking through what would be the best of breed approach to solving that problem, and then look at what gaps there are, and that helps us to catalog what there is already that fits some of this problem, to document it, and then to promote the best of breed that's there already. And if there's gaps, then yeah, we can start looking at do we need to create tools, and how do we go about collaboratively doing that, or just documenting that someone should work on this, and then call out to the rest of the community to see if there's anybody interested in stepping up.
Well, at least for my company, we're starting to work on tools. Maybe not at the C level currently, but we're interested in building tools more than documentation, so maybe there should be a focus for different members of the working group.
Yeah, there's very much different levels of debugging. So one area we look is at memory analysis. Then there's just looking for problems in your node code, or looking for problems in the actual underlying runtime. But if we're doing all that under the same working group, at least we can find out where there's sort of commonalities in the infrastructure that either already exists that we can use, or for other purposes to fill in some of the gaps in the other areas, or when we're writing infrastructure, making sure it can be shared across those areas. I don't know, does that?
Do we have any? Is anyone in this meeting currently in touch with like the V8 people to obviously debugging, particularly post-mortem debugging, will probably require some interaction with V8 specifics. Do we have anything, any interest from the V8 people at all?
So I talked to Gary somewhat, and he's one of the V8 debugger people. They're mostly limited in terms of resources for time. There's some minor interest, but most of their interest is getting their existing tools to be workable on abort rather than trying to make new tools.
When you say workable on abort, do you mean at the point of an abort that the debugger becomes active in the running process, or that at the point of an abort a core file is generated and the tools will work on the core file?
A core file, but not. Their existing infrastructure does not support core files that would be accessible by the standard debuggers. They're going to be basically Chrome DevTools files.
So, just following this discussion, does this sort of imply that actually some of the work this group's liable to want to do, or the areas we want to touch, are actually slightly wider than Node.js?
I would say, in terms of V8, yes. I don't think the browsers will be doing this anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
But this does bring up an interesting topic of when we're talking about core files and things, most of the existing tooling for Node and V8, even the browsers, is not done in a format that's read by MDB, GDB, all that. It's all done pretty much in JSON files that are compressed in various ways. And discussing how to work with that would be good.
So, can you? I'm fairly new to V8. Can you give me an example of that?
So let's walk through some stuff. There's a npm module, node heap dump, which generates a file when it's run called basically the timestamp dot heap snapshot. And dot heap snapshot is a specific schema for JSON that is understood by Chrome dev tools. And they do...
So that's the V8 heap dump format, right?
Yes, which is what V8 team's interest is in. They are not so interested in explicitly exporting specifics about implementation to a core file and trying to make that stable.
I think the questions to answer, I think, in order to guide the discussion about the format, are what are the design constraints? What are we trying to accomplish with this thing? I imagine that the design constraints around that are different than the ones around using a core file. Is that fair to say?
That sounds fair to me.
That sounds good. It's just we may need to support more than raw core files, I guess, is my overall point.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. I think as a group we probably need to figure out who are we delivering what to, and then figure out, okay, what are the, as I think it was Chris was talking about, what are the debugging use cases we want to describe and figure out the best things for, the best solutions for, and then there may be many of those.
Yeah, I mean, core files have an advantage that they're a full image of memory, which means it should be fully possible for us to generate a V8 heap dump from a core file. But really, that's just implementation of how we get the data. As Dave says, it's kind of like we have to first work out what problems people are going to want to solve, and then ideally look at what existing technologies allow us to do that. And the V8 heap dump format's a good one because we can get it into the Chrome developer tools. Those are already well developed and well supported. And one thing we may decide that we need to look at is how we would get V8 dumps from core files, because if you have catastrophic failure, you've got a core file.
But I'm not sure whether a V8 heap dump would be that useful in the event of a catastrophic failure, because you've got the problems may or may not be the heap, but it's not necessarily going to help you debug that.
Does the V8 heap dump have any notion of anything other than JavaScript objects? Does it provide any information about natively allocated memory or or native stack frames in the current process or anything like that?
So I have had a little look at it. I was wondering earlier if there are any other artifacts, and I don't believe it does. No.
There
Okay.
are some, but they're all about V8 implementation details.
Right.
There are some specific things where you may see artifacts about how V8 is storing strings. You may see artifacts about all sorts of things revolving around garbage collection routes, about hidden class transitions, but nothing about actual memory. This is all about the graph of IDs and properties.
Is it reasonable to say that in a Chrome environment there aren't really any native modules in the way that there tend to be in Node programs?
Chrome actually loads up a decent chunk of C++ to do things specifically relating to the DOM.
Okay. But then the debugger support doesn't really let you see much of that, or?
They have a bridge, so they take both the heap dump from V8 and they have a separate serialization for DOM bits, and then they kind of mash them together in the Chromium code base.
Okay.
They combine the Blink dump and the V8 dump to produce stuff.
But so critically, it's all a subset for which code has been written specifically to serialize things.
Yes, but that code changes frequently.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm wondering what sort of actions we should take to try and decide what the use cases are, what the existing tools are, and what the gaps are. So I was going to suggest maybe creating a document on GitHub and trying to catalog some of the tools in there, but making sure that so not just one person updating it, but so that anyone can update it with tools they're aware of or gaps they think they've identified over the next few weeks before the next meeting, so we can just all gather our knowledge on there. Does that sound like something that's worth doing? Or does someone else have a better idea?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say we need something that just talks about problems that people are going to want to solve, which we think come under the heading of post-mortem, whether that means post-crash or post some kind of event where at that point someone's going to want to have a snapshot of data, shall we say. And then I think having a list of everything that helps us generate data on an event or process data that we think might be useful in these scenarios, if we can build all of that list together, then I guess we can start trying to map the two and talk about what we think is the problems we should be focusing on and the tools and capabilities we should be focusing on.
I think that sounds great.
Okay, so if that sounds like a good first step, I'll get that set up tomorrow. I think Google should archive the call for me, so I'll go through and write up the minutes listening to that tomorrow morning and try and put that up. And I'll perhaps try and create those documents as well. Is there much else people want to discuss in this first meeting?
This may be actually part of that exercise that we were just talking about, but Chris just brought up the question of I think it was Chris of what is post-mortem debugging? What is in scope for this thing? And maybe that's just part of that exercise, and we should just like put use cases under that as well. There's a both offline analysis. I mean, maybe it's just all offline analysis, or maybe it's just after a crash or something in between. I don't know. Maybe it does make sense to just do the same thing.
Yeah, actually, you've kind of come around to a question I was going to ask at the end, which is whether people were actually happy with the name post-mortem. Partly just because some people might not like the fact it's a bit death-related, but also whether it accurately captures what we're trying to do. So I think Chris mentioned earlier snapshot debugging, and you've mentioned offline analysis, and both of those maybe capture better that, okay, particularly in the case of sort of a memory issue, the application might still be running, but you may have taken a snapshot or a dump of some kind to figure out where all the memory's gone while it's still carrying on. So possibly a thing to think about between now and the next meeting is whether we actually want to rename this.
I think that post-mortem is definitely... So to the extent that you can do snapshot debugging and that you can do other, like you can do things which are not completely post-mortem, I think that the technology that you use to do that should still be applicable even in the post-mortem case. And I think post-mortem really captures that it is the technology that you use should be able to do an autopsy if all that you have is a core file. It can potentially do the same thing for an incremental snapshot, like on the operating system that we ship at Giant. You can take discretionary core files, which are essentially snapshots of a running process that look like a core file from a process that had died. But the emphasis of postmortem is that there is no requirement that the process be running anymore to get full fidelity information out of the thing. And I do think that post-mortem is really the term that has been used to describe this kind of analysis for a very long time. So I think it probably makes sense to keep calling it that, at least for the time being.
That's fine. It's also important to have a name that sort of other people looking in from outside the group kind of understand what it means. So yeah, if other people are happy, that's the common term. That's fine. Sometimes with IBM, we tend to end up with our own terminology for things. It's just worth checking with the outside world. That's really the case.
Yeah, so I think Dave phrased it quite well in that I think the name post-mortem is fine. I think the intent is probably a lot more around offline analysis. So yes, whether it's a dump that's been generated because the thing's dead, or it's a dump that's been generated because someone's just requested it because, I don't know, they've had an event, and that event is their route in Express has taken 10 seconds to respond when it should take 1. Right? If they want to trigger a whole load of dump data or a whole load of collection, which is then processed offline because it's too expensive to do in process, then that potentially comes under the remit as well.
Okay, so it sounds like it would be worth getting at least sort of something around the snapshot and something around the offline analysis, at least in the project description, so people can find it on Google. But people are generally happy with the name post-mortem. Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
For me.
It has my vote.
Cool. So, is there anything else people want to discuss now? Is there anything else people would like to be done between now and the sort of next meeting?
I guess, Howard, if you can get those documents started so that we've got somewhere, or issue threads that we can use to start talking about what we think are failure scenarios and problems that people would try to solve, and we can talk about what data collection capabilities exist today and tools and so on, then that starts to map everything out for us. And I think, yeah, once we all seen that list and contributed to it, I think we'll probably be able to have a much more in-depth discussion.
Okay, that sounds good. Do people want to discuss the date of the next meeting on this call, or would you like to discuss? Or should we discuss that on an issue on the GitHub pages as well?
I think it probably makes sense to schedule them at least until we find a rhythm, probably somewhat closer to the meeting date.
Mm-hmm. Also, I guess
whether that's 1 or 2 weeks from now or whatever. I mean,
if we discuss it on the GitHub page, the people who couldn't make it today can see the discussions as well.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Good meeting.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try and get those up on GitHub tomorrow morning our time, so they should probably be up when you guys come in tomorrow. Those of you who are in America.
And Howard, I've been taking a bunch of notes as we've been going, so I'll send those over to you as well.
Okay, I'll write up the minutes by listening to the playback on YouTube, so long as that's worked.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.